There was a girl named Adeobi, and she had everything you could think of. Money, cars, clothes, and a huge house in Lagos with so many rooms that even she didn't know what was in all of them. Her father, Chief Akinwale, was one of the richest men in Nigeria. People treated Adeobi like a princess, but she didn't feel like one. To her, it was all fake. Everyone around her only seemed to care about her money, not who she really was. One evening, Adeobi sat in her massive bedroom, staring out of the window. The city lights of Ikoyi sparkled, but they didn't make her feel happy. Her mother had just told her that Chief Akinwale wanted her to meet another rich businessman's son, someone they thought would be perfect for her. Adeobi didn't even know the boy's name yet, but she already hated the idea. She sighed, running her fingers through her soft braids. Why can't they just let me live my life? Why does everything have to be about money? She muttered to herself. Suddenly, the door burst open, and her mother, Mrs. Akinwale, walked in. She was dressed in a bright green lace dress, her gold jewelry clinking with every step. Adeobi, you're still in your room? Didn't I tell you to come downstairs? Your father wants to talk to you. Adeobi rolled her eyes but stood up. She knew better than to ignore her parents. What does Daddy want this time? Mrs. Akinwale looked at her daughter and sighed. It's about your future. You're not getting any younger, Adeobi. You need to settle down with someone who can take care of you. Take care of me. Adeobi snapped, her voice rising. Mummy, I can take care of myself. I don't need some random rich boy to marry me. I don't even know him. Her mother frowned, her perfectly shaped brows furrowing. Don't raise your voice at me, Adeobi. We're doing this for your own good. Do you know how many girls would kill to have the life you have? You're being ungrateful. Adeobi's chest tightened with anger. Ungrateful? Because I don't want to be married off like I'm some kind of property. At that moment, Chief Akinwale's deep voice echoed from the hallway. What's going on here? He stepped into the room, towering over both of them. His presence was commanding, and Adeobi instantly felt her frustration bubble over. Daddy, you can't keep controlling my life like this, Adeobi said, trying to keep her voice steady. I want to live for myself, not for what you think is best for me. Chief Akinwale's face darkened. And what exactly do you know about living life, Adeobi? Do you know how hard I've worked to give you this life? Do you know the sacrifices I've made? And now you're telling me you don't want to listen to us. I never asked for all of this. Adeobi shouted, tears stinging her eyes. I didn't ask to be born into this family. I just want to be myself. Is that too much to ask? Her father's eyes narrowed. You're acting like a child. You think the world out there is easy? You wouldn't last a day without the comfort we've given you. Adeobi's fists clenched at her sides. Maybe I need to find out for myself. Then, her parents looked at her like she had lost her mind. Mrs. Akinwale placed a hand on her husband's arm. She doesn't mean that, darling. She's just being dramatic. But Adeobi meant every word. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had to get out of there. She had to prove to herself, and to her parents, that she could survive without their money. The next morning, Adeobi woke up with a plan. She packed a small bag with a few clothes, leaving behind all her designer outfits and expensive shoes. She stuffed a notebook and pen into the bag, along with a little money she had saved from her allowance. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not even her best friend, Sade. The less anyone knew, the better. As she stood at the front door, she took a deep breath. The house was quiet, and her parents were still asleep. She slipped out, the weight of her decision pressing on her shoulders. She took a cab to Sorulia, a busy area far from her family's wealthy neighborhood. The streets were noisy and crowded, with people hustling to make a living. It was a world completely different from the one Adeobi had always known. She found a small guest house and paid for a room. It was nothing like her room back home, just a bed, a fan, and a tiny bathroom. But to Adeobi, it felt like freedom. A few days later, Adeobi began looking for a job. She walked into shops, kiosks, and restaurants, asking if they needed help. Most people turned her away, saying she looked too soft for the kind of hard work they needed. Finally, she came across Maman Ketch's kitchen, a small buka with a faded signboard and the smell of freshly cooked jollof rice wafting through the air. Adeobi stepped inside, her heart pounding. Maman Ketchi, a stout woman with a kind face, stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on a bright yellow apron. She looked up as Adeobi entered. "Yes? What do you want?" Maman Ketchi asked, her voice firm but not unkind. I'm looking for a job," Adeobi said nervously. Maman Ketchi raised an eyebrow. You want to work here?" "Yes, Ma," Adeobi replied, trying to sound confident. Maman Ketchi studied her for a moment. "You don't look like someone who knows how to hustle. Are you sure you can handle this kind of work?" "I can learn," Adeobi said quickly. "I'll do anything." Maman Ketchi chuckled. We'll see. Come tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. sharp. If you're late, don't bother coming back." "Thank you, Ma. I won't be late," Adeobi said, relief washing over her. The next morning, Adeobi arrived at the buka before sunrise, dressed in a plain t-shirt and jeans. The work was harder than she had imagined. She had to carry heavy trays, wash endless plates, and deal with impatient customers who shouted their orders. By the end of the day, her arms ached, and her feet felt like they were on fire. But as she lay in her tiny guesthouse room that night, she smiled to herself. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was doing something real. Adeobi didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to prove to herself, and to her parents, that she was more than just the billionaire's daughter. The next morning, Adeobi stood outside Maman Ketch's kitchen at exactly 5:45 a.m., watching the sky slowly turn from deep blue to the soft orange of dawn. The air was cool, and the streets of Sorulia were just waking up. She felt nervous but determined. Maman Ketchi arrived a few minutes later, a large basket of fresh vegetables balanced on her hip. She raised her eyebrows when she saw Adeobi. So you're serious about this job?" "Yes, Ma," Adeobi replied quickly, trying to hide the butterflies in her stomach. "Good. Follow me inside." Adeobi followed Maman Ketchi into the kitchen, which was already buzzing with activity. A tall, wiry man was chopping onions at lightning speed, while another woman, stout and stern-looking, was stirring a giant pot of soup. The delicious smells of spices and freshly cooked rice filled the air. Maman Ketchi clapped her hands. "Everyone, this is Deborah, the new girl. She says she wants to work here. Let's see if she can handle it." The stout woman, who Adeobi later learned was Grace, snorted. "She doesn't look like she's ever carried anything heavier than a handbag." Adeobi's cheeks burned, but she forced a smile. "I'll do my best, Ma." Grace didn't look impressed. We'll see." Adeobi's first task was simple, sweeping the floor. Or so she thought. The kitchen was small but cluttered with crates of vegetables, sacks of rice, and large cooking pots. As Adeobi tried to maneuver the broom around the tight spaces, she accidentally knocked over a bucket of water. "Hey!" Grace shouted, her hands on her hips. "Are you trying to flood the kitchen?" "I'm so sorry," Adeobi said, quickly grabbing a mop to clean up the mess. Maman Ketchi shook her head but didn't say anything. The wiry man chopping onions, whose name was Musa, chuckled under his breath. "First day and you're already causing walla," he teased. Adeobi tried to laugh along, but her heart sank. She had barely started, and she was already messing up. As the morning rush began, Adeobi was given her next task, serving food to customers. The buka quickly filled up with people, construction workers, traders, and Okada riders, all shouting their orders. The noise was overwhelming. "Madam, bring me rice and beans," one man shouted, waving his hand. "Sisi, where is my iba and aguzi?" "I've been waiting," another called out. Adeobi hurried from table to table, balancing trays of food. But her inexperience showed. She tripped over a chair leg and nearly dropped a plate of jollof rice. Be careful," the customer scolded, glaring at her. "I'm so sorry," Adeobi mumbled, setting the plate down. By the end of the morning, Adeobi felt like she had run a marathon. Her arms ached from carrying heavy trays, and her feet throbbed from walking back and forth. But she didn't complain. As she sat on a stool in the corner, catching her breath, Grace walked over, arms crossed. "You're not cut out for this, girl. You should just go back to wherever you came from." Adeobi looked up at her, determination flashing in her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." Grace raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." Despite the tough start, Adeobi refused to give up. Every day, she woke up early, determined to get better. She learned how to carry multiple plates without spilling, how to deal with rude customers, and how to keep the kitchen clean. Slowly, she started earning the respect of her coworkers. Even Grace began to soften, though she would never admit it. One afternoon, as the lunch rush died down, Maman Kechi pulled Adeobi aside. "You're a hard worker, Deborah. I can see that. But you need to toughen up. This isn't a place for soft people." "I understand, Ma," Adeobi said. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Maman Kechi nodded. "You'll do fine. Just don't let Grace scare you off. She's tough on everyone." Adeobi smiled, feeling a small spark of hope. Over the weeks, Adeobi began to find a rhythm in her new life. The booker became like a second home, and her co-workers became like family. Well, almost. Grace still loved to tease her, and Musa never missed an opportunity to crack a joke at her expense. But Adeobi didn't mind. She was learning, and that was all that mattered. One evening, after the booker had closed for the day, Adeobi sat on a bench outside, enjoying the cool breeze. Musa joined her, a toothpick dangling from his mouth. "So, Deborah," he said, leaning back, "you've been working here for a while now. What's your story? Why did you decide to work in a place like this?" Adeobi hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth, that she was a billionaire's daughter trying to escape her privileged life. Instead, she said, "I just wanted to try something different." Musa nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Different, eh? Well, you're doing okay so far. Just don't let Grace bully you too much." Adeobi laughed. "I won't." But life at the booker wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, a particularly rude customer came in. He was a middle-aged man with a loud voice and a short temper. "Where's my food?" he barked, slamming his hand on the table. Adeobi rushed over with his plate of amala and uidu. "Here you go, sir." The man barely looked at her. "What took you so long? Do you think I have all day?" "I'm sorry, sir," Adeobi said politely. "Sorry for yourself," he muttered, digging into his food. As she walked away, Adeobi felt her frustration bubbling inside her. She wanted to snap back at him, but she knew she couldn't. This job was important to her, and she wasn't going to let anyone ruin it. That evening, as Adeobi walked back to her guest house, she thought about how far she had come. She was no longer the spoiled girl who had everything handed to her. She was learning how to work hard, how to deal with difficult people, and how to stand on her own 2 feet. But deep down, she wondered how long she could keep this up. Would her parents ever forgive her for leaving? And would she ever find what she was truly looking for? As she unlocked the door to her small room, Adeobi took a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing. She was exactly where she needed to be. The morning sun shone brightly over Maman Kechi's kitchen, and Adeobi was already busy serving food to a growing crowd. The booker was alive with noise, the clatter of plates, customers shouting their orders, and Grace barking instructions from the kitchen. Adeobi had learned to keep her head down and focus on her work, even when customers were rude or impatient. As she carried a tray of steaming jollof rice and fried plantains to a table, she noticed someone new walk into the booker. He was tall and slim, wearing a grease-stained t-shirt and jeans. His skin was dark and smooth, and he had a smile so bright that Adeobi almost dropped the tray she was holding. The man looked around, then walked up to the counter. "Good afternoon, Ma. Please, 1 plate of rice and beans with dodo." Adeobi quickly turned back to her work, feeling her cheeks flush. She didn't know why she was so flustered. It wasn't like she hadn't seen handsome men before, but something about this man's easy smile and calm voice made her heart skip. Grace smirked as she handed the plate of food to Adeobi. Don't just stand there. Go and serve him. Adeobi shot her a glare but took the plate and walked over to the man's table. Here's your food, sir, she said, placing the plate in front of him. The man looked up at her and smiled again. Thank you, Madam Waitress. Adeobi blinked, caught off guard by his warm tone. You're welcome, she said quickly before hurrying back to the counter. As the lunch rush died down, the man stayed at his table, eating slowly and scrolling through his phone. Adeobi couldn't help but steal glances at him every now and then. Grace noticed and nudged her playfully. You like him, don't you? Grace whispered. What? No, I don't, Adeobi replied, her voice too quick and defensive. Grace laughed. You're not a very good liar, Deborah. Adeobi rolled her eyes and turned away, but her heart was racing. She didn't even know the man's name, and already Grace was teasing her. When the man finished his food, he walked back to the counter to pay. Thank you for the food, he said, handing over some Naira notes. It was very good. You're welcome, Maman Kechi replied with a smile. Come back anytime. The man turned to Adeobi and said, You serve food like a pro. I'll definitely be back. Adeobi laughed nervously. Thank you, sir. I'm Chidi, he said, holding out his hand. Adeobi hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. I'm Deborah. Nice to meet you, Deborah, Chidi said, his smile as warm as the afternoon sun. Then he turned and walked out of the buka, leaving Adeobi feeling strangely light-hearted. That evening, as Adeobi cleaned up the tables, Musa came over with a mischievous grin. So, Deborah, who was that fine gentleman you were smiling at earlier? Adeobi groaned. Musa, don't start. I'm just saying, Musa said, holding up his hands in mock defense. He seemed to like you. Did you see the way he was smiling at you? Adeobi tried to hide her smile. He was just being polite. Polite, eh? Musa teased. We'll see if he comes back tomorrow. The next day, Chidi did come back. This time, he ordered Iba and egusi soup and sat at the same table as before. Adeobi tried to stay focused on her work, but she couldn't ignore the way her heart fluttered whenever she walked past him. When she brought his food to the table, he smiled up at her. Thank you, Deborah. You're becoming my favorite waitress. Adeobi laughed nervously. It's my job, sir. Call me Chidi, he said. No need for all that sir stuff. Okay. Chidi, Adeobi said, feeling her cheeks warm. As she walked away, she heard Musa chuckling behind the counter. Favorite waitress, eh? Deborah, you're in trouble. Over the next few weeks, Chidi became a regular at the buka. He came almost every day, always sitting at the same table and ordering something different each time. He and Adeobi started talking more, their conversations growing longer with each visit. One afternoon, when the buka was less busy, Chidi asked, So, Deborah, how did you end up working here? You don't seem like the usual type. Adeobi froze for a moment. She couldn't tell him the truth about who she really was. She had to think fast. I just needed a fresh start, she said carefully. Chidi nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that. Sometimes you just need to step away and figure things out. Adeobi smiled, relieved that he didn't push further. What about you? What do you do? I'm a mechanic, Chidi said. I work at a small workshop down the road. It's nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. A mechanic. Adeobi said, her interest piqued. Do you like it? Chidi grinned. I love it. Cars are my passion. One day, I'm going to open my own auto repair shop. A big one, with all the latest equipment. Adeobi admired the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his dream. That's amazing. I'm sure you'll make it happen. Chidi chuckled. I hope so, but it's not easy. It takes a lot of hard work and money, and I don't have much of either right now. You'll get there, Adeobi said, her voice sincere. Their friendship grew quickly after that. Every time Chidi came to the buka, he and Adeobi would talk about their dreams, their struggles, and everything in between. Adeobi found herself looking forward to his visits, even on the busiest days. One evening, As they sat outside the booker after closing, Chidi asked, "Do you ever think about the future, Deborah? Where you want to be in 5 or 10 years?" Adeobi hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I guess I just want to be happy," she said finally. Chidi smiled. "That's a good goal. Happiness is everything." Adeobi looked at him, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone saw her for who she really was, not for her family's wealth or status. But even as she enjoyed Chidi's company, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. How long could she keep her secret? The following morning at Maman Ketch's kitchen, the sun rose like any other day, casting golden rays through the booker's wide-open doors. Adeobi was already wiping down tables, her movements quick and focused. She hummed softly to herself, a tune she couldn't quite place, as the day's work began. Chidi's visits had become the highlight of her routine. Though she tried not to show it, her heart raced a little every time she heard the bell above the door ring, hoping it was him. She told herself it was just friendship, nothing more. But the way his smile lingered in her mind told a different story. As customers trickled in, the noise level rose. Orders were shouted, plates clattered, and the kitchen smelled of peppery soups and fried plantains. Adeobi barely noticed the chaos because her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversations she'd had with Chidi the day before. When the bell above the door jingled, Adeobi glanced up. There he was, Chidi, in his usual grease-stained t-shirt and jeans. His smile was as warm as ever, and Adeobi's heart did a little flip. He walked straight to the counter where Maman Ketchi was busy taking orders. "Good morning, Ma," he said, his voice deep but cheerful. "I'll take the usual today, jollof rice, plantains, and chicken." "Coming right up," Maman Ketchi said, scribbling the order down. She turned to Adeobi. "Deborah, serve him. He seems to like you best." Adeobi tried not to blush as she took the plate and walked over to Chidi's usual table. "Your usual," she said, setting it down carefully. "Thank you, Deborah," Chidi said, flashing her a grin. "I think you know my order better than I do." Adeobi laughed nervously. "Maybe you should try something new next time. Why change a good thing?" Chidi teased, picking up his fork. Adeobi lingered for a moment, pretending to adjust the tray in her hands. She liked talking to Chidi, even if it was just for a few seconds. But before she could think of something else to say, Grace's voice rang out from the kitchen. "Deborah, stop standing there like a statue and get back to work." Adeobi sighed and turned away. "Enjoy your food," she said quickly before hurrying back to the counter. Later that afternoon, when the booker was quieter, Chidi stayed behind as usual, scrolling through his phone while sipping a cold bottle of malt. Adeobi used the opportunity to clean the tables near him, hoping for a chance to talk. "So, Deborah," Chidi said, breaking the silence, "do you ever take a break? You're always running around." Adeobi smiled, wiping down the table next to his. "Breaks aren't part of the job description here." "Well, you deserve one," Chidi said, leaning back in his chair. "You work harder than anyone else I've seen." Adeobi laughed. "Tell that to Grace. She thinks I'm too slow." "Grace? That one will complain about anything," Chidi said with a chuckle. "Don't let her get to you." Adeobi appreciated his kindness. "Thanks. I'll try." Chidi set his bottle down and looked at her curiously. "You know, you never told me why you decided to work here. You don't seem like the typical booker girl." Adeobi hesitated, her hands tightening around the cloth she was using to clean. "I just wanted something different," she said finally. "A chance to start fresh." Chidi nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. Sometimes, stepping away from the familiar is the only way to grow." Adeobi felt a wave of relief. He didn't push her for more details, and she was grateful. The truth about her past was something she wasn't ready to share. Not yet. Days turned into weeks, and Chidi became a constant presence in Adeobi's life. He showed up at the booker almost every day, always with the same warm smile and easygoing charm. Their conversations grew longer, and Adeobi found herself looking forward to them more than she wanted to admit. One quiet afternoon, when the booker was nearly empty, Chidi sat at his usual table, tinkering with something in his hands. Adeobi couldn't resist her curiosity and walked over. "What's that?" she asked, gesturing to the small device in his hands. "It's a carburetor," Chidi said, holding it up for her to see. "It's part of a car engine. I'm trying to fix it." Adeobi tilted her head, intrigued. "Do you always carry car parts around?" Chidi laughed. "Sometimes. I was working on a car earlier, and I wanted to take this home to figure out why it's not working properly." "You must really love what you do," Adeobi said, sitting down across from him without thinking. "I do," Chidi said, his expression softening. "Fixing cars isn't just a job for me. It's my passion. I've always loved figuring out how things work." Adeobi admired the way his face lit up when he talked about his work. "That's amazing," she said sincerely. "I wish I was as passionate about something as you are." Chidi looked at her thoughtfully. "You will be. Sometimes it just takes time to figure out what makes you truly happy." Adeobi felt a pang of guilt. Chidi had no idea who she really was or why she was working at the booker. But his words touched her, and she nodded. "Maybe you're right." As their friendship grew, so did the teasing from Grace and Musa. "You two talk like you've known each other forever," Musa said one day, leaning against the counter. "Are we invited to the wedding?" Adeobi nearly dropped the tray she was holding. "Musa, stop it." Grace smirked. "He's not wrong, you know. That Chidi boy likes you." Adeobi shook her head, her cheeks burning. "We're just friends." "Friends," Grace said, dragging out the word. "Sure, Deborah. Keep telling yourself that." Adeobi tried to ignore them, but the truth was, she wasn't sure what she and Chidi were anymore. Their conversations had become more personal, more meaningful. She felt a connection with him that she couldn't explain, but she was terrified of what would happen if he found out the truth about her. One evening, after the booker had closed, Chidi offered to walk Adeobi home. The streets were quiet, and the cool night air felt refreshing after a long day. "Thank you for walking me," Adeobi said, glancing at him. "It's nothing," Chidi said with a shrug. "I just want to make sure you get home safely." They walked in silence for a moment, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty street. "Deborah," Chidi said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Adeobi said, though her heart began to race. "Do you ever feel like you're hiding from something?" Adeobi froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" Chidi looked at her, his expression serious. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like there's more to you than you let on. Like you're carrying some big secret." Adeobi's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him everything, but fear held her back. "Everyone has secrets," she said softly. "It doesn't mean they're bad." Chidi nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "I just hope you know you can trust me." Adeobi swallowed hard, her emotions swirling inside her. "I know," she said quietly. They reached her guest house, and Chidi smiled at her. "Good night, Deborah." "Good night, Chidi," Adeobi replied, watching as he walked away. As she closed the door behind her, Adeobi leaned against it, her heart heavy. She had never felt this close to someone before, but the weight of her secret threatened to destroy everything. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up the lie. The next morning, Adeobi woke up feeling a strange mix of emotions. The cool morning breeze swept through her tiny guesthouse room, but it didn't calm her racing thoughts. Chidi's words from the night before echoed in her head. "Do you ever feel like you're hiding from something?" She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. There was no point dwelling on it now. She had work to do, and as always, the booker would be busy. At Maman Ketch's kitchen, the day started like any other. The smell of fried akara and freshly cooked rice filled the air, and customers streamed in, shouting their orders. Adeobi focused on serving food and cleaning tables, her mind still preoccupied with Chidi. As the lunch rush slowed, the sound of a familiar voice made Adeobi look up. There he was, Chidi, standing at the counter with his easy smile. "Good afternoon, Ma," he said to Maman Ketchi. "The usual, please." Adeobi felt her heart lift just seeing him. But as she grabbed his plate and headed to his table, she couldn't ignore the small knot of guilt tightening in her chest. Your usual, she said with a small smile, placing the plate in front of him. Thanks, Deborah, Chidi replied. He hesitated for a moment before saying, Can you sit for a minute? I have something to tell you. Adeobi blinked, surprised. I guess I can. She glanced around, making sure Grace wasn't watching, then slid into the seat across from him. Chidi leaned forward, his expression serious. Something happened yesterday. What is it? Adeobi asked, her voice quiet. My workshop. It got demolished, Chidi said, his voice tinged with frustration. What? Adeobi exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth. Chidi sighed, running a hand through his short hair. The landlord sold the land to some big company. They didn't even give us proper notice. One day, I was working on a car, and the next, bulldozers were tearing everything down. Adeobi's chest tightened. She could see the pain in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world was on them. Chidi, I'm so sorry. That's awful. He nodded. It's not just me. My team, my customers, they're all affected. I've lost my main source of income, and I don't know what to do next. Adeobi's mind raced. She wanted to help him, but how? If she revealed who she really was, would he accept her help? Or would he feel betrayed? Is there anything I can do? She asked softly. Chidi gave her a small, sad smile. Thanks, Deborah, but this is something I have to figure out on my own. I'll manage somehow. That evening, after the booker closed, Adeobi couldn't stop thinking about Chidi's situation. She sat on her bed, staring at her notebook, where she had jotted down ideas for helping him. But no matter how much she thought about it, one thing was clear: she couldn't let him struggle alone. The next morning, Adeobi woke up early, determined to do something. She pulled out her phone and made a call she hadn't made in months. Hello, Sade, she said when her best friend picked up. Adeobi? Sade's voice was full of surprise. Where have you been? Do you know how worried I've been? I'm sorry, Adeobi said quickly. I promise I'll explain everything later. But right now, I need your help. Sade sighed. Of course. What do you need? I need to get in touch with my father's company. They're starting some kind of entrepreneur competition, right? Yes, I heard about that, Sade said. Why? There's someone I want to help, Adeobi said. I need to make sure he gets a chance to win. Sade was quiet for a moment. You're really serious about this, aren't you? I am, Adeobi said firmly. Please, Sade, can you help me? Okay, Sade said finally. I'll see what I can do. A few days later, the announcement came. A local entrepreneur competition was being held, with a cash prize to help the winner start or grow their business. Chidi heard about it while talking to a friend, and his eyes lit up with hope. Deborah, he said excitedly when he came to the booker that afternoon. Did you hear about the competition? Adeobi nodded, pretending she hadn't already known. Yeah, I did. Are you going to enter? Of course, Chidi said, his smile wide. This could be my chance to rebuild my workshop. I just need to put together a strong business plan. I know you'll do great, Adeobi said, her heart swelling with pride. Over the next week, Chidi worked tirelessly on his application. Adeobi offered to help, and they spent hours at the booker after closing, going over ideas and strategies. What do you think of this? Chidi asked one night, showing her a draft of his business plan. Adeobi read it carefully, nodding. It's really good. You've thought of everything, your budget, your goals, even how you'll market your services. Chidi grinned. Thanks. I couldn't have done it without your help. Adeobi smiled back, but the guilt in her chest grew heavier. She was helping him, yes, but she was also keeping a big secret from him. She told herself it was for his own good, but deep down, she wasn't sure if that was true. When the day of the competition arrived, Adeobi watched from the sidelines as Chidi presented his plan to the judges. He spoke with confidence and passion, his love for his work shining through every word. When the results were announced, Adeobi held her breath. And the winner is Chidi Okafor, the announcer declared. The crowd erupted into applause, and Adeobi felt a surge of relief and joy. Chidi had done it. As he accepted the prize, Chidi looked over at Adeobi and gave her a thumbs up. Her heart swelled with pride, but the small voice in the back of her mind reminded her that her secret was still there, waiting to be uncovered. That evening, as they celebrated with bottles of malt and plates of suya, Chidi pulled Adeobi aside. "Deborah," he said, his voice soft, "I don't know how to thank you. You've been there for me every step of the way. I couldn't have done this without you." Adeobi felt a lump in her throat. "You did all the hard work, Chidi. You deserved to win." He looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. "You're more than a friend, Deborah. You're special." Adeobi's heart skipped a beat, but before she could respond, Musa called out, "Chidi, come take a picture with your trophy." Chidi smiled at her one last time before joining the others. Adeobi watched him, her emotions swirling inside her. She was happy for him, but the guilt of her secret was heavier than ever. She didn't know how much longer she could keep it from him. The night of the celebration, Adeobi couldn't sleep. The tiny room in her guest house felt even smaller, its walls pressing in on her. Chidi's words echoed in her mind. "You're more than a friend, Deborah. You're special." She wanted to feel happy, she should feel happy, but the secret she had been keeping made her stomach churn. She had helped him win, but she hadn't been completely honest. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't keep hiding the truth. "I have to tell him," she whispered to herself in the dark. The next morning, as she walked to Maman Ketch's kitchen, Adeobi rehearsed what she would say to Chidi. She imagined his reaction. Would he be angry? Hurt? Would he ever speak to her again? Her thoughts were interrupted when she arrived at the buka and saw Chidi already there, sitting at his usual table. He looked up and smiled as she walked in. "Good morning, Deborah," he said, his voice warm. "Good morning, Chidi," Adeobi replied, forcing a smile. She felt her palms grow clammy. As she grabbed an apron and got to work, Chidi kept stealing glances at her. After a while, he stood and walked over to the counter where she was cleaning plates. "Deborah," he said softly, "can we talk?" Adeobi froze, her heart pounding. Sure," she said, putting down the cloth she was holding. Chidi led her outside to the small bench behind the buka. The morning air was cool, and the street was quiet except for the occasional honk of a passing car. "I've been thinking," Chidi began, his hands fidgeting nervously. "Ever since the competition, I've been trying to figure out how I got so lucky. It's not just the prize, it's you. You've been there for me through everything. And now, I feel like I can't keep this to myself anymore." Adeobi's breath hitched. Was he about to? "I care about you, Deborah," Chidi said, his voice steady. "More than a friend. You've become such an important part of my life, and I don't want to imagine it without you." Adeobi stared at him, her heart racing. She had dreamed of hearing these words, but not like this, not with the weight of her secret looming over them. "Chidi," she began, her voice shaky, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" he asked, his brows furrowing with concern. Adeobi took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. "My name isn't really Deborah. It's Adeobi. Adeobi Aikenwale." Chidi blinked, confused. "Aikenwale? As in?" "Yes," Adeobi said quickly, her voice trembling. "My father is Chief Aikenwale, the real estate billionaire. I'm his daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Chidi stared at her, his expression unreadable. "I came here because I wanted to live a simple life," Adeobi continued, her voice cracking. "I was tired of being treated like some spoiled rich girl. I wanted to prove to myself that I could survive without my father's money. That's why I've been working here. Why I didn't tell anyone who I really am." Chidi's jaw tightened, and his hands balled into fists. "So all this time, you've been lying to me." "It wasn't a lie," Adeobi said desperately. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to see me differently." Chidi stood abruptly, his eyes flashing with anger. "But you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You let me believe you were just like the rest of us, struggling to make ends meet. And all along, you were a billionaire's daughter playing waitress. It wasn't like that, Adeobi said, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't playing. I was trying to find myself. Chidi shook his head, stepping back. You don't understand, Adeobi. Do you know how hard my life has been? How much I've struggled to build something for myself? And you've had everything handed to you, and you still couldn't be honest with me. Chidi, please, Adeobi pleaded, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. Chidi's expression softened for a moment, but then he shook his head again. I need time to think, he said quietly. I can't do this right now. He turned and walked away, leaving Adeobi sitting on the bench, her heart shattered. The days that followed were some of the hardest of Adeobi's life. She went to work every day, but Chidi didn't show up at the booker. The lively conversations and teasing that once made her days brighter were gone, replaced by an emptiness she couldn't shake. Grace noticed the change in her. Deborah, no, wait, Adeobi, she said one afternoon, pulling her aside. What's going on? You've been like a ghost these past few days. Adeobi sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. I told Chidi the truth. About who I really am. Grace's eyes widened. You mean he didn't know? No, Adeobi said quietly. And now, I think I've lost him. Grace shook her head, her usual sharp tone softening. You're braver than I thought, girl. Telling the truth takes guts. If he really cares about you, he'll come around. Adeobi nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. 1 week later, Chidi walked into the booker. Adeobi's heart leapt when she saw him, but she forced herself to stay calm. He looked different, tired, as if he hadn't slept much. He sat at his usual table, and Adeobi hesitated for a moment before walking over. Hi, she said softly, setting a glass of water in front of him. Hi, Chidi replied, his voice quiet. There was a long silence between them before Chidi finally spoke. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. Adeobi nodded, her hands trembling. And? Chidi looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and something else, something softer. I was angry. I felt betrayed. But I also realized that you didn't have to tell me the truth. You could have kept hiding, but you didn't. I couldn't, Adeobi said, her voice breaking. You mean too much to me, Chidi. I didn't want to lose you. Chidi took a deep breath. I care about you too, Adeobi. But I need to know, was the competition? Was it rigged? Did you help me win? Adeobi's heart sank. I made sure you had a chance to compete. But everything else was you, Chidi. Your plan, your presentation. It was all you. Chidi stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you. Relief washed over Adeobi, but it was quickly replaced by uncertainty. Does this mean, can we start over? Chidi smiled faintly. I don't know if we can start over, but we can try to move forward. You're not just some billionaire's daughter to me, Adeobi. You're the person who stood by me when no one else did. And I'll never forget that. Adeobi felt a tear slide down her cheek as she smiled back at him. Thank you, Chidi. As they sat together, talking quietly, the booker buzzed with life around them. Adeobi didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Chidi reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. We'll figure it out, he said softly. And in that moment, Adeobi believed him. The next morning at Maman Ketch's kitchen, Adeobi arrived earlier than usual. The cool air and empty streets gave her time to think. Her conversation with Chidi from the previous day had stayed with her all night. His words, his acceptance, and the small smile he'd given her filled her with hope. But she knew things wouldn't be the same. Chidi had said they could try to move forward, but Adeobi understood it would take time to rebuild the trust she had broken. As the booker came to life, with Grace clanging pots and Musa sweeping the floor, Adeobi forced herself to focus on the day ahead. She grabbed her apron and started preparing for the breakfast crowd. It wasn't long before Chidi walked in. Adeobi looked up, her heart skipping. He gave her a small nod as he headed to his usual table. Grace leaned over and whispered, "Looks like Lover Boy is back. Are you two okay now?" Adeobi shook her head. "We're talking. That's a start." Grace snorted. "Talking is better than silence." As the morning rush died down, Chidi waved Adeobi over. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a bottle of malt and brought it to his table. "You looked busy," he said, taking the bottle from her. "Breakfast rush is always hectic," Adeobi replied, sitting across from him. They sat in silence for a moment before Chidi spoke. "I've been thinking about something." "What is it?" Adeobi asked, her voice soft. Chidi tapped his fingers on the table. "The new workshop. I need to find a good location, but rents in this area are so high. I don't want to rush into anything and end up losing everything again." Adeobi nodded, understanding his concern. "You'll figure it out, Chidi. You're smart and careful. You'll make it work." Chidi looked at her, his gaze steady. "I don't just want to figure it out. I want you to help me." Adeobi blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you," Chidi said firmly. "You've been there for me through everything. I trust you, Adeobi. I know you're good at planning and thinking ahead. If we're going to build something strong, I want you to be part of it." Adeobi's heart swelled. "Chidi, I'd be honored to help. Whatever you need, I'm here." Over the next few weeks, Chidi and Adeobi worked tirelessly to find the perfect location for his new workshop. They walked through crowded streets, met with landlords, and inspected empty spaces. Adeobi used her connections sparingly, careful not to overshadow Chidi's efforts. One day, they stumbled upon an old building on the outskirts of Soyulir. It was run down, but it had enough space for a garage and even a small office. Chidi's eyes lit up as he inspected the place. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "This is where I'll start again." Adeobi smiled, her heart swelling at the sight of his enthusiasm. "It's perfect, Chidi. I can already see it. Cars lined up outside, customers coming in and out, your name on a big sign." Chidi grinned. "You really think so?" "I know so," Adeobi said confidently. As they began the process of renovating the space, Chidi and Adeobi grew even closer. They spent long hours together, painting walls, cleaning floors, and setting up equipment. Musa even joined them one weekend, cracking jokes and making the work feel lighter. One evening, as they sat on the floor of the workshop eating suya and drinking malt, Chidi turned to Adeobi. "You've done so much for me," he said. "I don't even know how to thank you." Adeobi looked at him, her eyes soft. "You don't need to thank me, Chidi. This is your dream, and I'm just glad I can be part of it." Chidi reached out and took her hand. "It's not just my dream anymore, Adeobi. It's ours." Adeobi felt her heart flutter. For the first time in months, she felt like she belonged, not to her father's world of wealth and status, but to something real, something meaningful. But just as things were falling into place, a shadow loomed over their progress. One afternoon, as Adeobi and Chidi were cleaning up the workshop, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside. Adeobi's stomach dropped when she saw who stepped out. Her father. Chief Aikenwale stood tall in his tailored suit, his face unreadable. Behind him, two of his security men flanked him like bodyguards. "Adeobi," he said, his voice cold. Chidi froze, his eyes darting between Adeobi and the imposing man before them. "Who is this?" he asked cautiously. Adeobi took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "This is my father." Chidi's eyes widened, and he took a step back. Chief Aikenwale's gaze shifted to Chidi, his eyes narrowing. "So, you're the one my daughter has been spending all her time with." Chidi opened his mouth to speak, but Adeobi stepped forward. "Daddy, what are you doing here?" "I came to take you home," Chief Aikenwale said firmly. "This charade has gone on long enough." "This isn't a charade," Adeobi said, her voice steady. "This is my life now." Chief Aikenwale's jaw tightened. "Your life? Working in a booker? Playing house with this mechanic?" Chidi flinched at the words, but he didn't say anything. "He's not just a mechanic," Adeobi said, her voice rising. He's a hardworking, honest man, and he's my friend. Friend? Chief Aikenwale scoffed. Is that what you're calling it? Daddy, please, Adeobi said, her voice pleading. You don't understand. I'm happy here. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something real, something meaningful. Chief Aikenwale's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. Adeobi, you're my daughter. You belong at home, not in this place. Adeobi shook her head. Home isn't about where you live, Daddy. It's about where you feel like you belong. And right now, I belong here. For a long moment, Chief Aikenwale said nothing. Then he sighed heavily, his shoulders sagging. You're stubborn, just like your mother. Adeobi smiled faintly. I'll take that as a compliment. Chief Aikenwale turned to Chidi, his expression unreadable. You take care of her, he said quietly. If anything happens to her, you'll answer to me. Chidi nodded, his voice steady. I will, sir. Without another word, Chief Aikenwale climbed back into his SUV and drove away, leaving Adeobi and Chidi standing in stunned silence. That night, as they sat outside the workshop, Chidi turned to Adeobi. Are you okay? Adeobi nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. I think so. He didn't yell as much as I thought he would. Chidi chuckled. You're braver than I am. I don't know if I could have stood up to someone like that. Adeobi smiled. You're stronger than you think, Chidi. And now, we can finally move forward, together. As they sat there under the stars, Adeobi felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew they could face it together. A few weeks after Chief Aikenwale's unexpected visit, life at the workshop was beginning to feel normal again. The space was slowly transforming, and Chidi's dream was taking shape. The walls were freshly painted, equipment was being delivered, and the garage sign, Chidi's Auto Works, hung proudly above the entrance. Adeobi couldn't help but feel proud every time she walked in. It wasn't just a workshop. It was a symbol of everything they had worked for together. But as the grand opening of the workshop approached, Adeobi felt a quiet tension building. Chidi had been distant, not in an unfriendly way, but she could tell he was holding something back. He often worked late into the night, leaving little time for the easy conversations they used to share. One evening, after the booker had closed, Adeobi decided to confront him. She walked to the workshop and found him under a car, tools scattered around. Chidi, she said, leaning against the doorframe. He slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag. Hey, Adeobi, what are you doing here so late? I could ask you the same thing, she said with a small smile. You've been working non-stop. Chidi shrugged. There's a lot to do. I want everything to be perfect for the opening. Adeobi stepped closer, her voice soft. Chidi, what's really going on? You've been so distant lately. Did I do something wrong? Chidi sighed, setting the rag down. It's not you, Adeobi. It's me. I've been thinking a lot about us. Her heart sank. What do you mean? Chidi hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. You're Adeobi Aikenwale, the daughter of one of the richest men in Nigeria. And I'm just, me, a mechanic. I've been wondering if I can ever really fit into your world. Adeobi's chest tightened. Chidi, I left that world because I didn't feel like I fit in. This, here, with you, is where I belong. But for how long? Chidi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens when you get tired of this simple life? When your father pressures you to come back? What if I'm just a phase? Adeobi stepped closer, placing her hands on his. You're not a phase, Chidi. You're my choice. My world isn't about money or status. It's about being with someone who sees me for who I really am. That's you. Chidi looked at her, his expression softening. Do you mean that? Every word, Adeobi said, her voice steady. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their emotions hanging between them. Then, Chidi pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. I'm sorry, he murmured. I guess I just needed to hear that. Adeobi smiled against his shoulder. You don't have to do this alone, Chidi. We're a team. remember? The grand opening of Chidi's Auto Works was a huge success. Friends, family, and locals from the neighborhood came to celebrate. The workshop was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of grilled suya from a vendor Chidi had hired for the event. Adeobi couldn't stop smiling as she watched Chidi move through the crowd, shaking hands and thanking everyone who came. He looked so happy, so alive, and she felt a surge of pride knowing she had been part of his journey. As the evening wore on, Chief Aikenwell arrived, dressed in his usual crisp suit. The crowd parted as he walked in, his presence commanding attention. "Daddy," Adeobi said, stepping forward to greet him. Chief Aikenwell nodded, his gaze sweeping over the workshop. "You've done well here," he said, his voice neutral. "It wasn't just me," Adeobi said, glancing at Chidi. "We did this together." Chief Aikenwell's eyes softened as he looked at his daughter. "I see that." He turned to Chidi, extending a hand. "Congratulations, young man. You've built something remarkable." Chidi hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." For the first time, it felt like there was a truce between them. A quiet understanding that went unspoken. As the event wound down and the last guests trickled out, Adeobi and Chidi sat together on the steps of the workshop, watching the stars. "This feels like a dream," Chidi said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's not a dream," Adeobi said with a smile. "It's real. And it's just the beginning." Chidi looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you, Adeobi. And I couldn't have done any of this without you," she replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the cool night air wrapping around them. But just as Adeobi began to relax, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her father. "We need to talk. Call me when you can." Adeobi frowned, her stomach twisting. "Everything okay?" Chidi asked, noticing her expression. "It's my dad," she said quietly. "He wants to talk." Chidi nodded slowly. "Do you think it's about us?" "I don't know," Adeobi admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." As she leaned her head against Chidi's shoulder, the weight of the unknown pressed down on her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let anyone or anything tear them apart. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.